Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and today I'm here with Mitch J. and Jamie Soden. And like Mitch and Jamie, were talking a little bit before we started recording about how they came to understand the free will illusion. And so maybe you guys could just sort of just sum that up for our audience a little bit to start out our episode.
I became interested in a lot of secular issues because of politics mainly. This issue of separation of church and state. When I was younger, I didn't really mind if people were religious or not. I used to be a very liberal kind of Christian. But then I realized that directly due to religious reasons, sometimes people would say ridiculous things or immoral things. Eventually, I came across Sam Harris, one of the four horsemen, popular atheist author, neuroscientist. And he has a gift for clarity, for being very logical and making very compelling arguments. And every couple years, he writes a book on a new provocative topic. So when he started addressing the issue of free will, I was in a very receptive kind of mindset. I analyzed the logic behind it, and I was convinced after giving it a bit of investigation. And since then, I've been finding anecdotal evidence to support the reality of determinism.
Yeah, and Jamie, how about you?
Well, how I came to accept free will as an illusion was mostly through George Ortega. I went to his what's it called, Georgia 057 YouTube channel, I think it's called, um, and I saw some of his speeches with you know Nick Vale, like how he explained why free will is impossible, and he explained it through law of cause and effect, because we know through Newtonian physics that with every action there's an equal opposite reaction, and there's no escaping causality. It affects everything.
Yeah, really, I think that's the most straightforward explanation of it ever because, everything has a cause that regresses back to before we were born, before we were even conceived, and we can't take credit or blame for it. So that right there, is true. And even when people try to throw in, quantum indeterminism and weird stuff like that, even if that stuff were true, we can't take credit or blame for that either. So the point is that we are not fundamentally responsible morally for anything good or bad. And that's how I like to explain it. And see, I got into this stuff partly because I was researching the Christian notion of free will, the free will defense to the problem of evil.
Augustine, right?
Yeah, I found that it fails on every point. In every possible way, the free will defense for the problem of evil doesn't work because it's the ultimate non-explanation. Because if you want to know why there's suffering in the world, and they're like, "Oh, well, free will. Well, why? Why is the evil here?" There's always a reason or a cause for something, and to say that somebody chose something for no reason and yet still make them responsible for it at the same time as saying it's beyond causality is just so logically contradictory that it kind of broke me out of that illusion. And I learned about it from George Ortega also as well. I listened to a whole bunch of his show and read his book. So that's kind of how we got into it.
Well, how did you guys find about how did you guys find George?
Well, it's kind of interesting. George, he actually commented on one of my YouTube videos years ago. It's a video that I've since deleted because it was so stupid. I was a Christian back then, and I said, well, that God can't know the future because we have free will, and so it's in this realm that God can't know. And it was completely nonsensical, but George commented on that video and told me that St. Augustine is that what actually came up with the Christian notion of free will. And so I kind of got into that and was intrigued by it. So that's how I ended up finding George. Actually, you might say he found me. Um, and and then I don't remember how Jamie said he came across George originally.
Yeah, Jamie. What about you?
Well, one day I was watching Sam Harris's videos on free will. This was like I think this was back in August, like 2014,
Okay.
or maybe before that. I can't seem to remember. But after I listened to a bit of that, I went to George Ortega's channel because I typed in free will is an illusion or something along them lines, and I came across Nick Vale and George talking on their Manhattan show or whatever it was called.
Right.
So
Yeah. Actually, let's see. I think I got some notification that David Joseph just came online, so I probably could add him to our call and he could still join us in this episode. Okay. Let's see. I'll try to add him to the call because this is good.
see what Christians seem to forget. Like this team seems to elude all of them, or they tend to ignore it or make excuses for it. Right? They say that the problem of evil causes suffering, like human. They say that humans choose to do harm to another person out of free will and all this stuff. They ignore the fact that this stuff happens in the animal kingdom as well, like animals getting brutally beaten and killed by predators in the wild, but they still suffer. How do you explain that? Are predators evil then? And my answer to that is no. They're acting on instinct. It's not their fault.
Well, I mean, we could spend all day
Yeah,
talking about
yeah,
all the things that are wrong with theism.
yeah.
I mean, I support you. Obviously, I'm on your side here. But but just to get a little back on, just to give a little bit of input about my, because I guess I didn't say anything about George. Maybe I should say a little bit. Um, are you guys familiar with Meetup, the
Yeah,
popular app?
I
I don't know
kind
if
of
it's
know how.
popular in the UK though. Sorry.
Yeah, there's not very many good meetups in my area, but I know about meetup.com and I know that George runs a meetup.
Right. So, I used Meetup in order to connect with atheists, and then I said, wait a second. Within this atheist community, there are not that many people who are investigating the notion of free will, and certainly not that many hard determinists or hard incompatibilists, whatever. People who just reject free will. Not many people who identify themselves as people who accept determinism and reject free will. So um, I said, well, why don't I just extend the use of Meetup to see if there are any people who have figured out this free will thing, and that's how I came across George.
Yeah, well, it's cool. And David Joseph, I added you to this call. We're actually in the middle of an episode, but we were each sharing our stories of how we came to see free will as an illusion, how we came across the topic and all that. So I've said some stuff, Mitch and Jamie have said some stuff, so maybe you would have something to say related to that, how you came to be part of this whole no free will movement.
Well, I'll keep it short and sweet because I'm not sure how long you guys have been on or how long the show's been going on. So I'll just say that I was first introduced to the idea through the Zeitgeist film series. They basically say about how we're all influenced by our environment and genetic predispositions and things of that nature. And so once you go from there, you've got that as like a standard, and then from there, it's pretty much you delve into free will through Sam Harris and all his all his lectures that he does and his talks, and that pretty much swayed me. But I mean, basically, it was the environmental influences that really kind of opened up my eyes to the idea that I'm not in control of what I do. I am being influenced from all areas at all times, and a lot of this stuff I don't have control over. So how can I have free will?
Yeah, and that's a good way of putting it because you know what? Even if we were all identically genetic, we were all the same as far as physically, the environments are always different. And that's why what ends up pushing us one way or another. And that's the thing is that, for example, we can't blame somebody for being what they are. They might be a really good or really bad person as far as their actions go, but we understand that they didn't really choose it. It's not like there was some moment in time when they could have chosen a different way. But we can still recognize this and let people know, well, what you're doing is hurting people, and this is not very nice. But one of the interesting things now, and for people who haven't heard episode 81 of our Free Will Science Religion podcast, it's called the No Free Will Diet, and it was actually David Joseph who suggested that as kind of our title. It was kind of interesting because we were talking about, fat shaming and how people blame people for being fat. They blame them for being overweight. They blame them for being lazy, and all that sort of stuff. And Jamie Soden knows some about that, don't you?
Yeah, because on the Katie Hopkins video, when she was discussing obesity with these people on this talk show, there was these people in the comment section on the video saying that people should stop being lazy and go lose some weight and stuff, or stop eating fatty foods. But it's more complicated than that, because a lot of this is going on in the realm of psychology. They're tricked into thinking that they need this amount of food and all this stuff.
Yeah, and people don't know what to eat or what not to eat. And here's another a way of putting it, Jamie. Is, people they can blame the people for eating unhealthy food. They try to do that, but then think about it. Why is this unhealthy food even available? If it's so bad, why is it available?
Why does the media advertise unhealthy foods as aggressively as it does? I mean, McDonald's especially, and all these other fast food companies, they keep on pushing this stuff, knowing that greasy food's going to clog up people's arteries and all that stuff.
I was just going to say, I'd be interested to know, is there a lot of fat shaming in the States? Or is it slightly more acceptable, perhaps? I don't know.
Well, I would say it's pretty bad in the States too. But here's what's funny about it, David, is that if you're a man, nobody cares if you're fat, but if you're a fat woman, well, then you're supposedly evil. I've never quite understood the sexism there.
Yeah, that's actually similar in the UK. Apparently, men can get away with being fat and not care too much, whereas if you're female, then it apparently affects you a lot more.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I never. Yeah,
sorry. No, please continue.
yeah, yeah. Well, for example, I saw this documentary called Super Size Me, where there was this guy, and he ate nothing but McDonald's for 30 days. He ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner at McDonald's. So at 3 meals a day, mean 3 times at McDonald's. And during that time, he pretty much ate everything on the menu, and his health got so bad he nearly killed himself with just what it did to his insides because he was just eating all this greasy junk at McDonald's and he wasn't getting any nutrition. He got really fat and it was just really interesting. I mean, but that just goes to show you, well, there's a lot of people who do live that kind of lifestyle. They are eating fast food all the time, and if it did that to him, that's an indication of what it might be
Well,
to other people.
uh, so yes. So let me chime in here. So we mentioned a lot of, well, we mentioned a few factors that contribute to why people gain weight. But I think the people who criticize fat people for being fat actually concede that there are factors out of the control of certain people. So they'll admit, okay, um, it's genetics. You're predisposed to being this way because of your genetics. You're predisposed to being this way because you have a low income, so you are only able to buy these foods that are available. Maybe you're depressed, etc., etc. They usually concede to all those factors. The problem where free will comes into play is that they believe that all those factors can be overcome via willpower. And I think that's where um, recognizing the deterministic nature of the universe is important.
And my response to that would be not necessarily, because there are other factors in obesity than just being overweight and then telling someone that they need to watch their diets or this could happen to them. It's How can I put this? Sometimes it might be depression that's causing them to repeat their lifestyle.
Right. But critics, people who are very critical of overweight people, would say, despite all these factors,
Mhm.
somehow you should be able to use your free will to overcome it. somehow, despite all these factors, you should be able to push yourself onto the treadmill and stop eating the food that you are addicted to, if you're addicted to it, and overcome. So
Right.
that's where, sorry, yes?
Yeah.
That's okay. Go ahead.
No, that was about the gist of it.
Yeah, I was going to respond to what Mitch was saying there. Yeah, like what Mitch said is true because people will admit there's all these factors outside of people's control, but then these people believe that somehow people have this free will which can override and nullify all that, and that somehow if they just willed themselves to, if they just wanted to bad enough, they would just be able to overcome all of that.
And what
Now,
certainly doesn't help
yes.
is all these dumb stereotypes, like David Joseph was mentioning, like people saying that overweight women were evil or stuff like that.
Yep, certainly. So, but, and I think that kind of argument, the argument that people can will themselves to overcome things, it can be dismantled pretty quickly. If you are an overweight person who does not want to be overweight, and you have the ability to invoke free will in order to conquer your addictions, then why wouldn't you? If you could, and if you want to do something, and you can do something, why would you not do it?
Exactly, because that's the whole thing. If you could have done otherwise, then why didn't you?
Yeah, if you're addicted to food and you don't want to be addicted to food, just make yourself not addicted to food. You can't because free will is nonsense. And
Yeah.
there you go.
Well, yeah, and you have to consider, guys, think about it. It's very difficult for people to change habits. Whenever there's a habit, there's a certain way they're used to being. It's actually very difficult for them to change their eating habits. For example, I once saw this show like on the internet. Like I saw some parts of some show where they had like this diet swap thing where they had like this one really fat person and this one really skinny person, and they had them swap diets to where they each ate what the other person ate for their meals per day. But both of them, it was so difficult. They could not stand the change of eating different types of foods, eating different amounts of foods. Like they couldn't handle that change, and it made them go kind of crazy, being put into that situation because it's not easy for people to change.
And I would compare this to drug addiction because ultimately this comes down to the thing that George was talking about, the hedonic imperative, excuse me, where people go towards pleasure and avoid pain. And if they're used to things that give them pleasure, they'll repeat that over and over again. Yeah. So.
Yeah, because what it really comes down to, guys, when you blame somebody for being addicted to a certain food, for example, it's sort of like blaming them for being addicted to alcohol or cigarettes or something
Not
like
sort
that.
of. It exactly is.
Yeah,
It is
Exactly.
equivalent.
yeah, and what's interesting about it is that what you'll notice, guys, and this is what I find strange, people tend to place a more, like a greater moral weight, like on alcohol than they do cigarettes, for example. And they tend to place both of those things on a higher moral weight than, eating unhealthy food. When in reality, I'm not concerned with over which is worse or not. You know what I'm saying? I'm not concerned which is better or worse to be addicted to one thing or another. The point is that it's the same kind of situation. That this person, they've been caused to be introduced to this type of thing that they're using, and it gives them pleasure, and like Jamie said, so they keep doing it, and it's interesting because we're not blaming them, but we can recognize that there's still great harm that can come if they're addicted to something that's bad for their health or that of those around them.
Yes, we can still help them. That's the point. So if someone is overweight and they are not succeeding in losing weight, it makes no sense to blame them. Most people will concede, as we talked about earlier, the factors that they cannot control. And if you have investigated the issue of free will and have come to the conclusion that it doesn't make any sense, it's illusion, it's incoherent, then you will be especially sympathetic because you'll realize they can't will themselves to overcome what needs to be overcome. But you can still help them. You can have an effect on them, an influence on them that can make it easier for them to become someone else. Make it easier for that person who currently cannot overcome his or her weight problems to transform into a person who can.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that even though change is often slow, we're not saying that change is impossible. It's just that it takes, sometimes people just need greater self-esteem. They need to know that there's somebody out there who cares about them and their well-being and who's willing to help them, but not blame them. Because once you start blaming people, then you turn into a jerk and they stay away from you.
Yeah,
I
no,
think
I don't like bigots that much. Even now that I don't believe in free will, I tend to not relate to. I tend to say nasty things about bigots sometimes because some of the stuff they come out with is really annoying.
during some of the conversations that I've had with people who are basically fat shaming on websites like YouTube, it comes down to a certain point where they're confusing free will with willpower. I don't know if any of you guys have experienced that at all.
Well, it's kind of weird because, like, and I've talked with George about this before, and it's kind of interesting because willpower is not necessarily the same thing as free will, although I think it does get confused because people act like you can just use your free will to have the willpower to make one desire nullify another desire. So people try to use willpower as some kind of a gateway to try to prove free will or something weird like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, yes.
it's like, go
So,
ahead.
well, I was just going to say, actually, we had a, I had a conversation with George yesterday, actually. Uh, the meetup group that I spoke of earlier, it had a meeting. We had a meeting yesterday, and this actually came up. Um, so yeah, what's the difference? What is willpower? Well, we could say that some people need more pleasure than other people. Some people are not satisfied as much as other people are due to all the influences that make them who they are, their brain, blah, blah, blah. So let's say you don't have a lot of willpower, meaning you are not a person who it's, 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 it's difficult for you to not have what you want. Can you will yourself to have more willpower? Does that make sense? Can you will yourself to have more willpower? If you could will yourself to have more willpower, that's a direct contradiction because where would it come from? The willpower is the source of the will. That's why we call it willpower. So you can't
Right.
will yourself
You have a
to
case
have
of
more
causa
willpower.
sui there. You have something being the
Yes.
cause of itself.
So, exactly.
Because if you could choose to not want what you want, um, well, then that means you have to want to not want what you want, which means you don't really want it.
Exactly.
Right, so you have to be influenced to have the willpower to begin with. So
Right.
it's kind of like pushing the question back a step further, to another cause or another reason, without actually answering the question of where does the free will come from?
Absolutely. Uh,
Yeah, and because the
it.
causes just regress infinitely,
Yep.
it's very difficult for them to just push it back one step.
Oh,
It's.
they do try. Every conversation I've had is them pushing it back again and again and again. I mean, they seem to have so much hate for anyone that can't do something that they can do comfortably. It's quite strange.
Well, yeah, have you ever heard people do this thing? Well, if I can do it, they can.
Yes.
Exactly that.
And what's interesting, for example, Jamie Soden mentioned Katie Hopkins. Well, from what I saw, she actually did some kind of a thing where she tried to gain a whole bunch of weight and then lose it just to prove that everybody could do it.
She did, and she did it as well. I believe. I think she put on something like I don't know, something like 3 or 4 stone, which I think is about 60 pounds, something like 50 pounds in US talk.
That's a
And then
lot.
she lost it again. Yeah, she did do really good, but again, it wasn't her free will, was it? It was her influences in her life that allowed her to put the weight on and then take it off. So she didn't really prove anything.
Right. And because
No, she just
here's
proved she just didn't want to lose the bet, because otherwise, if she lost the bet, then she will be humiliated. So
And another thing, guys, is that not everybody has the same genetics as her, and not everybody has the same lifestyle or perhaps the same financial resources as her, and so it's not like many other people could actually try to do the exact same experiment as her and get the same results because of the fact that we're all different. So in that sense, she hasn't proven anything at all, you know.
All she has done is verify that she could do it one time when motivated and under public scrutiny.
Well,
That's
yeah.
all she's done.
Right. It's not the same situation as all the rest of us in our daily lives. I mean, you might say that people who are under public scrutiny, well, they do things that most of the rest of us would never do. For example, have you ever heard of, like, actors or actresses where they will intentionally gain a whole bunch of weight for a certain role and then lose a whole bunch of weight for another role? And like,
Certainly. Yeah.
and I'm like, this is really dangerous to play with your health like this. You know what I mean? And intentionally try to change your body just for the sake of appearing in a certain movie. But then again, what's the power of money? Its power to motivate people. They want the money for being in these shows, and so they'll do anything. Even they're so highly motivated that I would say that that's where what causes them to have that willpower is the promise of money they'll get for doing it.
Additionally, uh, a common theme, a common trend we see is with female celebrities, they get pregnant, gain a lot of weight because that's natural when you get pregnant. But because their public image requires them to be attractive and thin, because they're incredibly motivated by money, amongst other things, they have special trainers and special diets and all kinds of people to help them, and they lose their weight, the weight from their pregnancy very quickly. Beyonce and Kim Kardashian and all these people, that's not realistic. That's not normal. They're obviously directly influenced by the motivations that they have to lose weight and the people around them who are helping them to lose weight.
Yeah, so they have access to greater resources that the rest of the public doesn't even have, for one thing, like you're saying. And it's also a very interesting paradox. I mean, what greater paradox is that this bizarre idea that women, to be accepted, have to be skinny, while at the same time they get pregnant, which is kind of contrary to that. You know what I mean? It's just like biology and the psychology of humans are always in conflict, man. It makes no sense.
Indeed.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, let's see. We're a little past 29 minutes. Is there anything anybody else wanted to say before we close this episode?
I just wanted to say that there was a response film to Super Size Me, and it's called Fathead, and it's about this guy who ate McDonald's. I think it was for a couple of months, and he actually lost weight, and his cholesterol went down. I know. It's crazy.
Now that sounds very interesting, David. I might want to Google that. So thanks for mentioning that, because anyone who listens to that will be able to look up that too. I highly recommend people watch Super Size Me and then whatever that fathead thing is that David Joseph just mentioned, because this is interesting. I think that's a good way to learn about these topics is watch videos and what people have done and what worked and what didn't. It's very interesting. So I guess with that, I'm probably going to close this episode because we're past 30 minutes. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs, Mitch J., Jamie Soden, and David Joseph. And we've talked about how we came to understand that free will doesn't exist and how we can't blame people for being fat and how willpower and free will are not the same thing and all that good stuff. So this is the end of this one. Bye.